What is happening, my friends? My name is Immortal Coil, your future minister of whiskey mysticism, wishing you the most savage revenge of the Fifth. Today, we are dedicating the stream to our one and only favorite Sith Lord, Darth Vader. Darth Vader captured our imaginations in 1977 from the moment he stepped on to the Tantive 4. Stormtroopers blasted the door open. My dogs are excited. And amidst a billow of smoke emerged the first Dark Lord of the Sith that we would ever see. Now, this had a profound psychological impact on the audiences of 1977. George Lucas did his homework, and he knew from reading Joseph Campbell and J.R.R. Tolkien that a dark wraith or a under the light maleficence would psychologically stimulate the audience into immediately perceiving evil. And then you combine that with Ben Burtt's sound effects. Now, originally, Ben Burt wanted this guy to sound like a walking operating table with like beeps and boops and hoses and gears and grinds. But after the microphone was dropped into the scuba gear, as it were, the ominous breath, that's what we got, chilling to the bone. Now, I was probably, the first time I remembered Darth Vader was on Betamax. My father tells me that he took me to see Return of the Jedi in the theater. I don't remember that. I just remember Darth Vader always being there. I also don't remember him not being Luke's father. But, you know, memory being it as it is, it was a powerful impact. And as I began to grow and develop and appreciate things like telekinesis and telepathy and psychic skills, Darth Vader became a very interesting point of study to me personally. We already got a viewer. I want to say Hell Bear, Nerd Fun. Thanks for joining us, sir. We will have more viewers on the replay, I am confident. But today, our favorite Dark Lord of the Sith, we will celebrate him. Now to take this a little more personal note, when I started getting into martial arts and metaphysics in an earnest way, because they had always been with me since I was a very small child, but something awakens at puberty. Ask the X-Men. That's when their powers tend to manifest. You're a normal kid, and then suddenly you mutate and turn into something different. Which is why the Jedi Order prefer to take you when you're a kid, so that you have no sort of outside context. Personally, for me, I started having more lucid dreams. I started being able to see auras. I started being able to hear people's thoughts, and it became particularly noisy to go into places like a mall or a theater. And then you get random motherfuckers. But then you start to latch onto something like Star Wars, which has always been there for me. And then became something quite different. Now I have a visitor knocking on the door. Perhaps this might be my good friend, Black motherfucking Angus. How are you doing, sir?
Yeah, I'm good, man.
It's been a while, my friend.
Yeah. I'm on my phone, so sorry if there's like clicking. That's just like the mic. I need to switch out my phone, but
It's okay. It sounds like you have a full house there too.
yeah, I got my crazy kids. So if I mute, it's because I'm telling them to stop something. Yeah.
Right on. Well, so yeah, like this very tiny sense of psychicness that we can grasp onto as a human. And I'm sure that we've all had that strange experience where my friend was thinking the same thing I was, or I was about to call you, but you called me, or the same guy working on the same invention on different sides of the Atlantic, and they come up with that at the same time. Have you ever had anything like that happen to you, Angus?
I can't think of an example, but yeah, there's been different times where it's like, I thought of that, or there was this idea in my head, and then I learned on accident later on because it's passive thought. Like, oh, someone actually did that. It's in evolution a lot. There's this idea. I think it's called Convergent Evolution, where it's like, why do birds and bugs both have wings? They have a totally different pathology, but they both, come about that way for totally different reasons. So it's present in a lot of different things.
Did you ever, maybe when you're by yourself, like stare at something and think like, if I just fucking did it a little bit, I can make it move, or I can make the wind blow a different direction, or make a bird fly a different way?
Not legitimately, but there's that fun of wanting to be a Jedi or a Sith, and control something. When I go to like Walmart or something, or some sort of sliding door place, I always like kind of do like a quick little wave in my hand, like Obi-Wan, and it worked. Timed it perfect,
Sure. And then if it fucking worked just once, imagine just using it for like evil purposes. Like I could kill somebody like this.
Oh yeah, I mean that's why fantasy games are so great. You can choose, left or right, same as like Fable or Coach or something.
That's what my dog thought about that. Well, let me ask you then, Angus. Do you ever remember not knowing Darth Vader and then seeing him, or was he just always there?
It's hard to figure out because I feel like I always knew of him. I didn't really understand the weight of "I am your father" or anything. Hold on, me help my kids.
Yeah.
Sorry, they're banging on a freaking xylophone in their room.
Well, and you are their father, so.
Yeah, no, it's funny. Unfortunately, like I wanted to keep my kids from Star Wars. Like I have a bunch of memorabilia in the house, of course. I'm a huge collector, but I tried to keep the films from them. But my wife just went behind my back because of how she grew up with Star Wars. Like, oh, I want them to like always have this with us, and I'm like, no, I want them to like be sheltered from it, and then actually like experience it with an understanding brain. Because my son's named Luke. Well, he's Lucas because of George Lucas, but kind of, we call him Luke, and so there's that Luke Skywalker. And I think my first Christmas gift or anniversary gift or something was a Vader Funko Pop before it became a huge thing. And my wife's like, "Get it? It's like you're the father." I'm like, "What?" Like I had no like I was just so excited. So I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? And then she's like, Luke Skywalker. I'm like, oh. Because like I don't really think of my son as Luke Skywalker. Like, he's a blonde-haired, blue-eyed little boy, but he's my little Sith. So we got some of the kids Star Wars books that are really great for fandom for the original 6-film saga of it's mainly bent towards the original trilogy, but it's got everything, and it's like Vader and Son or something like that. And there's a daughter one too.
Yeah, so it's like a cutesy little cartoon thing, right?
Yeah, my son, he's like, "Oh, look, Dad, like I dropped my ice cream and you gave me yours." I'm like, "Nuh-uh, I'm gonna eat it myself." And I got a cool sense of humor. But yeah, he gets a kick out, man, and he's recently become hooked on Jawas, which is funny because I got the Jawas Hot Wheel car, and it made me remember when just out of the blue, it was weird. He was probably not even 18 months old, but I got my wife this baby Groot toy, and I had my Jawa car that I found at the store for my own collection. And my son, not really understanding Star Wars at all or anything, or my fandom, he saw this Jawa car, no idea of Jawas, and he just was like flabbergasted. I've never seen him shocked like that at any point in his life since or before. He was just so enamored, like he had to have this car, and I could not let him have it. And he's been playing with it again. I showed him the Mandalorian episode with the Jawas, and he really likes them.
The Suga. Yeah. Yeah, for real. Well, to your nearest recollection, Empire Strikes Back, Vader's in his meditation chamber. He's faced away from us, so he looks like fucking Jason Voorhees. And that's all we get. Like, the mask shuts down and he flips around. How old were you the first time you saw that? And how did it make you feel?
I don't know. It didn't really stick. Like, for me, before the prequels, my mom had this boyfriend, and like the guy had like a 13-year-old son or so. And pretty much the only movies they had was Titanic and the Star Wars trilogy. And they were really excited about the new movie coming out. And I already wanted to see it just because of the commercials and the toys. So I was interested, but I didn't really care about the original trilogy. Looking back, I feel if you're not really raised with it, you know, or if you don't have like a kind of acculturation in classic film, you may not appreciate it because besides the lightsabers, like it's kind of not engaging the kids in my view, you know. The kids that first saw it when it came out in the 70s and 80s, that was new and crazy. But, you know, I grew up with Power Rangers and Digimon and Pokemon, so it was kind of like there's nothing really awe-inspiring after the fact seeing Star Wars. So besides the lightsabers, nothing really stuck. I don't really remember much. Like I know I saw it, but it was kind of just passive. I didn't care. I wish there was something else to watch at the time. You know, because of the prequels, I've grown to appreciate the whole saga. And of course, I understand the better character storytelling, but I love the prequels more because of that fandom getting me into it that way. And I think you're actually getting Lucas's full vision with the prequels. You know, he's kind of pigeonholed himself by telling a prequel story and has to tie together. But I think the prequels are better for just storytelling because he's not focused on characters really. He's focused on like a world, you know, and all these different events affecting this outcome to get to that original story. So it's kind of an equal and opposite for me. But yeah, Vader and all that, like I don't remember ever having an impact in that way with like the helmet. That's something I've appreciated as I've gotten older, just little storytelling details and stuff and intrigue. You know, just like the line about last time we met and this and that, and then you learn like, oh, they had this big fight on Mustafar and its whole history. But yeah, I don't know. I actually got a video plan about the shortcomings of Star Wars, just as a concept. The way it was built and then where it went is kind of like had itself stuck in certain ways. There's certain reasons why the story has gotten the way it has with Disney, and now it's becoming comic-y, where you need reboots or something to just start over.
Well, and this is something I've been thinking about for a little while, Angus, is that Star Wars, as far as George Lucas was concerned, was the journey of Anakin from innocent to light to dark and then back to light at the behest of the Son. And I sense some maybe like Judeo-Christian kind of like playing with that idea. But then you get Disney who comes in and they just want to like totally run over all that shit and make it about what, like girl princesses? Is that the sense you get to?
There's a lot there. Well, for one, you know, with Reylo, I've never really had a problem with Reylo stuff. And like when you really deconstruct it, it's just like people, because they hate Disney, they like to like twist the story as like, oh, it's, you know, this is an abusive relationship, so you shouldn't fantasize. And it's like, you know, some girls fantasize about rape. You know, it's like horrific, but they do. You know, it's weird.
It's part of human psychology.
Yeah. And so it's like I don't really harp on that stuff trying to demean people's fandom of Reylo for like with that vein. I really think it's just you know, as much as they want to push feminism, they've essentially made a weird princess fantasy with their new Star Wars. You know, it's really not much different. It's like they're all fawning over this tragic will he won't he hero in Kylo. You know, given his past, he's kind of a prisoner to his legacy that he's born into. So there's kind of an empathy you can have for him with that, and yeah, it's kind of funny. There is like a princess thing, but you know they've got Rey, who's kind of a princess, and then you got her trying to get her prince, who's like a bad boy, and it's not much different than the stuff that they cry about. Like Ariel has no agency; she's just a girl who's hoping to be a prince's girl and have babies, you know, or any of these princess stories, how it's hurts feminism. It's really the same thing in just a more complex, weird telling in modern day. So they've kind of shot themselves in the foot with what the biggest, I would say, devoted fandom in the new trilogy. So, you know, they're intent with feminism and Holdo. Everyone's just latched onto this princess fantasy and Raylo. So but I would say with like you're talking about like Christian stuff with Vader, there's definitely some Christian elements. He's both Satan in the fall and the prodigal son in his return. So there's a duality to Vader, just like his light and dark side. But I've really kind of compartmentalized Disney Star Wars as member berries for the nostalgia for money making, and it's corporate franchise. It's just a piece of their empire. So like, don't expect deep stuff. Yes, go play. Don't expect anything deep or challenging like what Lucas did. You know, Lucas told the Hegelian dialectic with Palpatine, and you're not really going to get that with Disney. You're going to just get like, remember what you liked. Here's Tusken Raiders, even though they're not being hostile for some reason, when they like instantly attacked Luke when he was just looking through his binoculars, you know, like
Right.
It's the facade without any understanding.
Right. Well, and I don't get how they can make a Rey or Palpatine anything other than what they are, except to destroy what came before. So in my mind and in my heart, and I think in many of our compatriots' minds and hearts, episode 6 was not perfect, but it was the best way to end that thing. And then to have a Rey come back and have to do it again means that what Vader Anakin didn't actually do it right.
Well, I mean, okay, here's the thing with Palpatine. I'm totally fine. People like to harp on the Palpatine comeuppance again, and I think they're kind of missing the whole story context. Is like whether it was the Force reacting to his meddling or if he actually did it with his power, his work across the galaxy made Anakin come up. All right, and he was trying to learn this, you know, making life, preserving life from Plagueis, and as far as we know, he did. Clearly he did, because he comes back in episode 9, or actually at some point in the middle between the trilogies, and just been like lurking, trying to like figure out to make a good clone to stay in or whatever. It's vague and crappy storytelling, but like the actual idea makes sense to me. Of like the shortcoming though is they didn't make a Horcrux or whatever, like what was it? Not the Voldemort
in Harry Potter.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or Sauron. They didn't make a vessel that you can break and then end the cycle. So that's the problem for the future of Star Wars, is you made this like potentially reoccurring, never-ending enemy. Not just the idea of conflict is never-ending, which is very Taoist, which is in Star Wars, but you've actually made this one villain essentially never go away. And for whatever reason that they think you're going to be dumb enough to buy, like, oh well, all the Jedi helped her in spirit, so now it's over. That's stupid, and they've left themselves open for criticism for eternity unless they figure out some way to write in that little entity that, like, oh, we can break this and it breaks the spell. But
that is a big giant plot hole, in that Sidious said, "Kill me, and then I will take over your body." and then you will be me, essentially. But so somehow the Jedi contained that essence transfer, or
I think what it is that she died, and so that's what he was trying to take over. Maybe that's the way they write themselves out of it. Is like, well, she died for a moment, and so that broke the chain of events or something. But I think Rookie Critic told me that the writers have said, "Oh, Palpatine can come back again," you know.
ad infinitum.
Yeah, so it's just like, I want to give you credit, man, but you wrote yourself into so many more holes.
Yeah, definitely.
But you're saying something about Christian and stuff with Vader. The other thing I was thinking of, this is like a flaw of Star Wars in general, is that Lucas, and this will wrote back into the Return of the Jedi ending. Lucas, I don't know, I think he's called himself a Buddhist Christian, which you can totally be, because Buddhism is a philosophy, Christianity is a religion. You can do both. The problem is, I think Lucas is Christian, or was Christian when he was writing, even though he's probably learning other stuff that was kind of against the norm to invest so much time in.
But you could tell by his other movies,
yeah. Like, I think the problem is, like, and I don't mean this in a negative way, he fetishized Eastern philosophy, and that's where a lot of Star Wars, the main lore of the Force on it comes from. But it's about balance, all right? And so Vader and Luke were balanced when they defeated Palpatine, because, like, Luke buys into the dark side. That's how he beats Vader, and then he stops when he sees his hand. He's like, "Oh God, I'm going to become my father." So that's, then he kind of goes back and centers, like, "No, I'm a Jedi." So in that moment, he buys into the light side, and he makes the Jedi temple, or he finds the Jedi temple, and he buys into the Jedi way and stuff. He buys into a way that's flawed because they think that they're the right, instead of needing like a Mortis plot of balance. And so that's the problem with Star Wars, is conflict is never ending, of course. And so you get recurrences like this with the Chosen One again and again through the lore, potentially. But also, it's like, even though they're telling the story of, like, the rules say there needs to be balance, but then they write it where it's like, the good guys need to win, and that's the end. The good guys win. It's like, well, you're just going to keep having bad stuff happen as a counter because it's not balanced. That's the main shortcoming of Star Wars. It's not the inevitable conflict. It's that you're telling two different stories in one. You're telling balance, but you're saying the good guys need to win.
Well, yeah, and even if we could pretend for a second that the EU still exists, the ancient Sith Lords constituted the dark side, but they were constantly destroying one another. And then you get to the point where Darth Bane happens, and he kills all the old Sith Lords and says, okay, the light side is too much, so we need to stay in the shadows, and then come back at some point, which pinnacled in Darth Sidious. So it's interesting. And I don't like to pay Disney too much mind at this, but once Darth Sidious and Darth Vader were destroyed, theoretically destroying the Sith, Luke Skywalker was free to start up his new Jedi Order. And from what I've read from the old EU, the fault of the old Jedi Order was that they weren't following the will of the Force. They were following the will of the Senate, which could be poisoned and corrupted through the misdoings of beings attached to things that the Jedi thought that they were above. So it's interesting food for thought.
Yeah, I mean, I give credit to the Last Jedi in different, like, ideas, concepts, like the hubris of the Jedi. One moment.
You're okay. But I was also wondering, whereas it took a millennia for the end of the old Sith era and the beginning of Darth Bane Sith versus the start of Luke Skywalker, and according to Disney, less than a generation before Kylo Ben undid everything. So what's up with that, man?
Sorry, could you like kind of recontextualize that?
That's okay.
What
So
you're asking?
you had a Darth Bane era Sith, which took a millennia to pollute the light side and bring down the Jedi Order on a galactic scale. But with no Sith present, with the destruction of Palpatine and Vader, it took less than a generation, according to Disney, for Kylo Ben to destroy Luke Skywalker's new Jedi Order. So what is that? That's like a rapid pendulum swing, if you believe Disney.
Yeah, I mean, I want to get into the EU, but there's just so much, and so like I'm a completionist, so I got to start with the Bane stuff, which I got like the first book. So at some point, I'm gonna sit down and crack it open.
It's so good, Angus. Like you're gonna be mad when you. Yeah. Okay, that's for you.
I've read like a third of the Revan book, and I'm just like, I don't know if they're writing the Sith well, or if like they're totally botching it, but it just seems kind of self-defeating, and I think that's wrong because they're supposed to be like, again, the whole balance idea. There should be good points to both sides, and so that's where I see it's like eating itself, or it's trying to buy in. The storytelling ultimately always buys into the good side because we're a Judeo-Christian society, or because it's human nature. I don't know, but it annoys me because there should be something redeeming about the Sith ideology. If there is indeed balance to be sought and not just one side winning.
Well, sure. So then to put it through the lens of the topic for tonight, what do you think Vader saw as redeeming qualities in the Sith doctrine that he did not see in the Jedi doctrine? Do you think it was purely selfish, like Padme, or do you think there was something deeper?
Well, I mean, ultimately the difference between the Sith and Jedi is the Sith think that the Force is something to be harnessed and wielded, to be controlled and focused, and only a select few have that potential. It's kind of like Thanos in a way, where Thanos is like, I'm the only one who has the will to act on it, and the Jedi are pacifists. Ultimately, they're supposed to be passive warriors, defensive warriors that react to injustice, not institutionalizing order or justice. That theirs is like being vessels for the Force to act through, as opposed to wielding it. So I think Vader saw that, especially being a war vet for years, essentially since he was 8, with the fight over Naboo. He's been in this intergalactic conflict and stuff, and seen like, oh, the will of the people and this and that. It's like, things would just be better if one guy just said how it's supposed to be. Like you get that before there's actually a two-way love interest between him and Padme, where he says this kind of premonitions through dialogue about how he sees the world and what should be done.
Oh, you mean like when they're on the grassy knoll with the weird little pig bear thing?
Yeah, like the little tick pigs or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's like ultimately supposed to be foreshadowing for his kind of intellect and his view of how politics should be and everything, and what he'll become an agent of for the Empire. But yeah, I think that was there before he had a investment from Padme. There was just like a friendship or a necessity of interaction because he's like her guardian. But then it progresses later. So I think that moment kind of reveals that he saw something, like he was saying things against the Republic and against what the Jedi were upholding in the Republic. So,
well, and okay, I want to assume that Anakin was probably like 17 or 18 when all this shit was taking place. Do you think he was saying those things to impress Padme, or because he believed that, or maybe a little bit of both?
Oh well, yeah. It's very clear he's interested in her as a lover. When she's not at the time. For probably 2/3 of the movie, she kind of denies herself or just refutes it. Um, so yeah, there's definitely him trying to impress her. I think that's just kind of, I don't know how much of that is in the dialogue though, because it's like, well, he's going beyond what Jedi allow themselves emotionally. So
Well, it
yeah,
almost seemed like she teased him. She was like, "Are the Jedi even allowed to love?" And he's like, "Well."
yeah, no, people crap on episode 2, and there's so much nuggets in that movie for the whole saga. I love it.
Mm-hmm.
Now
Mm-hmm.
it's paced poorly, and there's a really good video by Wisecrack about why that is, because of the movie Lucas was trying to emulate, Dr. Zhivago. Never watched it, but they give a good synopsis and they give good counters to like why it doesn't work in Clone Wars for what he was trying. But aside from that intent, I think there's a lot there, but the pacing is definitely like all over the place.
Well, yeah. So, and these are going to be some questions that belie the savage aspect of what I try to do, but that must be asked because the Jedi Order is a monastic order, and I wanted to say that George Lucas might have been making an allusion to the Shaolin monks, something like that. Um, but if you follow Judeo-Christian, fucking even Islamic, and especially Islamic, if the Jedi weren't allowed to masturbate or nut, wouldn't that be a source of continuing frustration? And how do you think they dealt with that? Or do you think they were allowed? What do you think, Angus?
Well, I mean, it seems pretty clear in tangent stories in the, I guess, EU now and stuff, that like they were always on missions, peacekeeping missions, before the war broke out with Naboo and then the actual civil war. So there's that to keep them occupied, or the training to do that stuff, but also meditating, since they're a monastic order. So I remember, I think there's a joke, was it Wedding Crashers, I want to say, where there's like that elf looking priest who, I think Vince Vaughn's pestering about jacking off or whatever. He's like, oh, come on, you got to do something. He's like, oh, I just pray, like.
Well, yeah. So you mentioned like Taoist traditions, and there's certain schools of Taoism that say that you can take your earthly desire and transmute it into spiritual energy, which is that what the Jedi did? I mean, the Force probably works different than the way that we conceive of spirit or whatever connects the physical to another physical in our earthly sense. But we also see things like Obi-Wan was very much attached to Satine from Mandalore. And I don't doubt that maybe Obi-Wan got sexual from time to time. Obviously the Sith did.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't mean this in like, people hear this word and they'll be like, ugh, evil. And it's like, no, satanic thought is about, it's very kind of libertarian in a spiritual way. It's all about, be what you want within the confines of injuring your neighbor, or, the legal system or what have you. And so I view the Sith in kind of like embracing pleasure as much as possible. It's very hedonistic, or I want to say Epicurean, but like Epicurean has like moderation, and the Sith are all about fulfilling desire and stuff, and that's why they give into like hate and emotion and everything as like their strength. So I don't know. It's hard to decipher. And also, when you look at like books written outside of the film saga, give you more context. It's like it's very much bogged down, I would say, with painting them in a bad light instead of one side of a coin of equal worth. So I don't like to rely on text necessarily to validate or or not any point like this discussion.
Well, okay, so let's say this then. So Anakin does his grassy knoll thing, and they're flirting and all this kind of stuff. But he gets to this point where they're in front of a fireplace, and he's like, well, we should do this. And she's like, well, we could do this. And he's like, yeah, but it would destroy us. And then he's like, but we could keep it a secret. And it's like, it makes me wonder, does Padme want this as much as he does, or is he trying to wear her down?
Well, how would I say this? 'Cause I'm thinking about Kylo Ren as well, because people don't get it in a fair shake.
We'll get to him. We gotta get through this.
Well, no, this kind of reflects, but ultimately, Anakin's main confidant is not Obi-Wan. It's, even though Obi-Wan definitely infers a lot, and then kind of makes subtle comments that dig at the reality, but the tragedy of Vader is not just his own desire, but it's also that he's a pawn, meddled with by Palpatine, and it's not quite clear how long it's been going on. You look at the full context of the saga, it seems perhaps like he probably picked up on who Anakin was once he met him. He probably sensed it, because Anakin didn't have like any sense of control, really. Especially he's being thrust in like new environments and stuff when he was just kind of seemingly at peace.
He's in kindergarten. And then, suddenly
he's like a first grader, and he's a slave this whole time, and a mechanic. The most freedom he gets is trying to pod race, or like getting parts for Watto. And so, like, you think he would like shield himself like the Sith do at that point? I think it's. I'll have to rewatch episode 1 at that part towards the end when Palpatine like meets him on Naboo or whatever.
Right. And he's like, we'll be interested in your career.
Yeah. So that might have been him kind of knowing all along, like, that's who I've been looking for. So, yeah, when you think about that, it's like, and, if he knows who Anakin is, and if he's like peering into his mind or something, or sensing him, and he probably knows this whole time about his interest in Padme, and given the reach that the Sith can, reach across the galaxy and kill someone or feel something, is it crazy to think that he might not have meddled with Padme along with the emotions, so it's like, there's not a lot of agency to decipher not necessarily. And what I was reading about Kylo is just like, a little tangent, is that people, I get so irritated. It's like, and they think, oh, you're a Disney show if you can make this argument. It's like, I'm just arguing the logic of the saga in its entirety. It's like, you cry about, you say like, oh, well, Vader was manipulated and this and that to become this and that, and to become who, Vader is, by Palpatine. But then they like ignore, because they hate that Kylo kills Solo, they ignore the fact that he's been meddled with this whole time by not just Snoke, but actually Palpatine, because Snoke was his puppet.
Through Snoke, yeah.
So it's like, he's just as innocent. This is a cyclical thing, And so you don't have to like the saga. You don't have to like Kylo as a character or something, but it's like, if you're going to give Vader the shake of like, oh, it's so great. Space Hitler is redeemed by his son. And it's like, well, really all Kylo did was like, he come up into a regime that already was there and is just as much meddled with as Anakin. And so it's like, how much agency does he have in his patricide, And they think, oh, you can't be redeemed because you killed your dad. And it's like, have you not read like any like quick blurb about Greek mythology? Like Zeus killed his dad, and he's like, everyone loves Zeus.
Well, okay. So next question, and again,
Sorry,
it's
I'm just calling out the self-serving. There's a lot of people that don't like this the Disney trilogy within our ranks of the Menace that, you know, like to turn a blind eye to the saga or to other storytelling, you know, and stuff to suit their narrative to hate, you know.
Well, and that's why we like your voice, Angus. I think that you're a fairly observative person, and even if you fucking hated the sequel trilogy, you might be able to pick it apart for its philosophical kernels, you know.
Oh yeah, dude. There's a lot in the Last Jedi. The biggest thing in Last Jedi to me wasn't the decisions it made, but the fact that it alludes to so much to, like, in Star Wars, you know, like to have resolution to the whole story, and then it's like, well, this is part 2 of a trilogy, and we want to keep pumping out movies, so everyone go back to your corner, you know. Like, it pulls the curtain up on the whole storytelling, you know, bells and whistles of Star Wars, and then it's like, you know, it's like the Wizard and Wizard of Oz, like, don't look over here, you know, never mind.
Well, it's the same thing. Like we can say, for example, Friday the 13th Part 6 is shit, but we could still kind of like go in there and, you know, figure out what was, you know, worth talking about. Which is not to say like I advocate Disney Star Wars, but if you want to make that mental exercise and consider it within that framework. So I had this other question here, and it's kind of hearkening back to what we just said. So the Jedi are a monastic order. Maybe it's ambiguous as to whether you're allowed to, you know, experience certain things, but say like you're 17, you're 18, you've been raised in a Buddhist monk kind of experience, and then suddenly you get to have sex with Padme. How do you think that changes your psychology and your body and your motivations? Because for a young man, like I don't know, I was in my mid-teens the first time I ever was with a woman, or whatever you prefer. I don't care about, like, you know, LGBTQ stuff, but the first time you're with somebody, it changes everything. So what do you think that does to a Jedi like Anakin?
Well, instead of being selfless, now you have a attachment, and you become possessive. And I think that's what people like. People like to like kind of word around stuff with love, where it's like, you know, your love interest in life is a possession. It's something you have, someone you have. You have someone's heart, you hope, and you and give it as well to that person. So there's a possessiveness that is just intrinsic, I think, if you're investing, and so that already is going to kind of corrode against, you know, it's you're a dad, I'm a dad, you know. I buy into that. I talk about the 2 philosophies of Full Metal Jacket that are both exemplified. One is better you than me, you know, and that can come into play of like a zombie apocalypse or coronavirus, where it's like, fuck you, I'm getting this toilet paper. I don't care about everyone else's need. I need to have it before you do. And think about that in the context of being a parent, you know.
Sure.
And so, you know, as much principle as people like to have, at the end of the day, we're vicious animals that will cannibalize each other. And I don't think the humanoid, the human whatever in the Jedi Order, if they corrupt themselves, if they open themselves up to a base level of humanity, they're no better than the next guy that feels that way about self-preservation and care of his own. And so that's probably why they try to forgo that, is because they probably see like
they know it's a path to attachment and then all that other kind of shit. Well, then I wonder too, because
it's no different.
I know, like, as a human fucking need, there's people who fuck to fuck and just to like have that base sensation, but then there's other people who want to make love, and it makes me wonder. Like, I think Anakin and Padme were both people who wanted to make love, but, you know, could that
Yeah.
still be a surrender to your lower levels?
Yeah, I think so. It reminds me of kind of the reasoning of, I don't know about other religions specifically, but within the denomination of Catholicism, the reason they push celibacy is because it's like you're dividing your attention, you're dividing your investment. Can you really be a father to your flock in the church if you're also like a husband and father and have all these kind of base attachments that are just menial compared to the grand scheme of God and his service? So that's the ultimate reason. And it's even in Paul, like his letters about, it's better if you can just forgo those human needs of attachment and marriage stuff and serve God fully. So I think there's a lot kind of, I don't know about the Buddhist or any of the Eastern texts and ways of thinking, but I can assume there's something similar kind of reasoning that Lucas pulled from to make the Jedi that way.
Well, in your own, excuse me, in your own experience, is it difficult to balance that? Can you be of the earth but also be open to spiritualism? Whether it's like carnal pleasure or being an attentive father or being a citizen of the world. What do you think, man?
It's tough to say. I mean, there's been a lot of great thinkers who have given something to the world that's lasted thousands of years. Whether they did it because of their God idea, and that's questionable or not, there's clearly an effect that transcends them. And, it's like how many of those, and I don't know the number left or right, but how many of those were attached versus kind of avoidant of the body to try to find the spirit. So I think that's kind of the argument.
Well, that's some interesting stuff. So Anakin gets with Padme, and they're together covertly, and we'll get into this a little bit too. But you've seen the Clone Wars, you know that he's with her sometimes, but most of the time he's deployed. Right, so he's waging his campaign with his soldiers. His wife's at home. They talk on the hollow fucking net or whatever they can do, but they only see each other very rarely, and not many relationships survive that.
Oh, I thought you had something else to add.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, well, I'm just speaking to you because you're a vet and you probably either been through that or know people who have.
Oh, yeah, there was we had like this phone you could call back home in our computer lab at my first base deployed, and the EOD guy, he had some sort of spat with his wife, and I remember he like hung, was like, "I fucking love you, bitch," and like hung up.
Okay.
So I didn't experience that. I was, kind of, just a single guy trying to, find someone through internet dating since I'm deployed and I'm in an Arab country, Arab Islamic country. So you can't be like Tiger Woods and like go off base and screw some honey and bring your kid home. It's like you're an infidel. Even if you're Islamic, you're part of the infidel state. So you're not like you're going to go date ladies or anything outside of base. So like I just didn't have that experience. I don't know what that was like. I don't know what it'd be like if I deployed in this state of life, being married with kids and stuff. And I'd probably have a different experience and really, if I'm not busy, loathe my existence like some guys do. Other guys enjoy, like I enjoyed deployment for the most part. It was lonely here and there, but that should be expected. But I think a lot of guys that deploy either really resent it, but they're getting paid, or they're actually like glad to be away from home. They're kind of avoidant, or they want something else out of life, and this gives them a kind of a break. I know my recruiter was like that. He's like, "Oh, my kids and my family, but it's nice to be away."
Well, so there was that one Clone Wars episode where, yes, Anakin and Padme are secretly married, but there was some motherfucker who was hitting on her in front of Anakin's presence, and Anakin's jealousy came out. And I don't remember if he actually like force choked the guy or like slammed him around or something, but there was like a little bit of violence there.
Yeah, no, it makes sense.
It's that Jody thing, right? Who's Jody,
yeah,
Angus? Can you tell us about him?
Yeah, I never experienced that or had people around me experience it, but yeah, there's been some bad stuff like, you know, I think this is the other dilemma of like modern warfare today with like technology to communicate back home so easily. Is you can get jodied and that can just wreck your whole deployment versus say even Vietnam or probably even the Gulf War, like communication was a lot slower. So if you got jodied, which is like being a boy or girl, it's kind of a genderless name. You know, your loved one at home just like up and leaves you for Jody. You know, some guy or girl swoops in and takes your lover while you're gone. So yeah, he wasn't getting jodied, but he was concerned with it. You know, it was like a lack of trust on his side and classic, you know, male jealousy, which is reasonable given the constraints on their marriage.
Well, yeah, he lost his mom, so he has that whole fucking thing going on. And
well, I mean, just the fact that like no one knows they're married, so everyone's gonna think she's free.
She's single. She's open for business, and yeah, she would. Well, and she never really presented herself as a what's that queen, the Virgin Queen of England.
Are you talking about like Victoria?
Yeah, Queen Victoria. So she was never presenting herself as Queen Victoria. She was just like professionally unattached.
Yeah, that's what I got. You know, like the Clone Wars gives more context, you know, to kind of assume for the films since they're written afterwards to like plug in. But it seems she just kind of was devoted to her planet and the war and stuff. Like she wasn't, besides Anakin, because that history wasn't really anyone to be romantically interested in her or her to anyone else. So you just kind of assume she was married to her job.
Yeah. Well, so Anakin's by now Vader, his perception becomes so obscured that he perceives Padme to be against him or plotting against him, and it enters into this kind of domestic violence thing where he's willing to choke her out and, you know, react purely out of emotion.
Yeah, well, here's the vein of thought I always thought with this, like she dies, of course, and they're like, oh, we don't know why, she just like dying of a broken heart was like how they put it poorly. But
the medical droids, they couldn't understand it.
I always wondered, I don't know if this is written anywhere, I haven't read the adaptation of it, but I always assumed it was either Anakin and his subconscious like pulling the life from someone that he's like just kind of not even thinking who it is, or if it was Palpatine siphoning the life into Vader to preserve him and thus give him, make him buy into the dark side more.
That's a theory I heard. So Palpatine pulls the life essence out of Padme, puts it into Anakin to help him survive his operation. Because from what I understood, in order to fully connect with the dark side, Anakin was not given anesthetics, and he was conscious during the whole thing. So they're cutting him open, they're grinding his bones, they're ripping out his organs that don't work no more. They're putting in machine parts. And then when he wakes up, he's like, where's Padme? And he goes, oh, you killed her. From a certain point of view.
Yeah. It's like you killed her, and it's like, well, he just kind of, you know, incapacitated her. You know, he's like, I felt her, she was alive, you know. Mm-hmm. And so all that kind of context that makes me think Palpatine killed her to warp Vader.
That is an interesting train of thought. So,
and of course, he lives on Mustafar. When you look at Rogue One, he lives on Mustafar to like, from what I understand, is per order of Palpatine, just to like isolate him in rage where he was defeated and last time he saw his wife, you know. And
Well,
so
did you
just
ever
like,
read those Vader comics where he went to Mustafar and built his castle and all that shit?
no, it sounds really cool. I was that from like the 2015 run or 17?
2015 Vader run, yeah. So in the comics, which is Disney canon, but I've found instances where Disney has violated their canon with the 2015 run. Um, Vader comes back from various missions, like he's bled his lightsaber, he's killed like a shit ton of Jedi, and Vader's trying to present Padme's Nubian ship, the big silver one that flew down and all that kind of stuff, as a present. But Vader doesn't give a shit. He wants to have his own place, his own planet, and he selects Mustafar, particularly for the reasons that you said. It's his most heinous defeat, and he wants to stew and brood and embrace his hate. Yeah, it's interesting stuff.
Oh, it's really cool, man. I when the Vader comics were coming out 2015, I started reading them, but I had my son, so I had no money, and so I just kind of quit.
Yeah, well, there's ways to procure them. We, of course, here on Savage Spirituality, recommend that you go and pay Marvel to go and see them, but there's other ways to do it, and I'm not in control of people who choose to do that way. So, okay, this concept, you've heard of eunuchs, sir, haven't you?
Yeah, like Varys.
Yeah, can you tell our audience what eunuchs are in case they don't know?
Isn't that just like guys that have their nuts and their junk removed?
Yeah, so specifically, their nuts were cut off. I don't think that their cocks were cut off because they still have to pee, but they were put in charge of protecting the harem for the sultan. But the idea was that if the nuts are not there, the desire would not be there. Does that sound and that's the same kind of thing like when guys consider getting a vasectomy, or when you have to take your dog in to get neutered, like why guys are just like,
Yeah, I don't know about that actually. If you still have a penis, if you can't perform, I would assume it probably affects you somewhat, especially with testosterone. But I don't know. I don't know anything about that besides just the character Varys as an example.
Mm-hmm. Varys from Game of Thrones.
Yeah, I always assumed he had everything gone and just had he had to pee like a lady.
And I can't recall because he told that story quite graphically at one point in the story. And it was some like magician, like he wanted to take his manhood and his fucking male essence and turn it into a potion or something.
Yeah, something like that. And turns out he found the guy and has him in a box.
Okay, so Obi-Wan has the high ground. Anakin's like, you underestimate my power, and he's like, don't try it. Anakin flips and then suddenly he's on the shore and he catches on fire. Now I know from medical fact that the fatty parts of you, and I'm sorry to say this, your balls and your vas deferens and all your internal plumbing is mostly fat. So that shit's going to burn first. And you're going to feel that until like the 3rd degree thing sets in, and then you're just burning from the inside. So, yes, folks, Anakin's dick was burned off. His balls were burned off. Let's have a solemn moment for Anakin's balls. I don't know what you're drinking. I'm drinking Alaskan Amber. So,
no, I was just wondering. There's some often commenter on the bullshit is like Vader's charred phallus or something like that.
yes. I know who you're talking about. I think that that's pretty close to his username. You can correct us in the comments either now or at some future point in time. But hail Darth Vader's charred phallus. I think that's what it is. So okay, back to the eunuch discussion. So the theory is that if you remove a man's testes, that he would no longer have a sexual desire towards women or towards his preferred fucking sex. But for Vader, it was women. Okay. And
Currently in canon, you never
currently
know.
in can shit. They're changing that shit every day. You know, I'm so fucking pissed off about this Wolverine thing. And not because I'm not open-minded, but because this was never a part of his historical background. They invented Dakin, who is bisexual, but Logan had never displayed bisexual or homo tendencies until just recently.
Until Hickman, I'm actually fine with it because I feel it's like a new story thread, you know, where as opposed to a triangle where Gene's kind of pulled either way, at least in the movie storytelling. Now you're adding an element of like investment and does he love me? Does she love me more or him more? Or, you know, are we more compatible than one of us?
So it's a different kind of tension for you.
Yeah, it's a different tension that it seems like a viable storytelling element, especially with the X-Men. It's a lot of, you know, personal. You know, the X-Men are endearing because you can get in their head more than other characters, especially with like the other elements, which never really made sense to me in the context of the Marvel universe. Why everyone's afraid of mutants, but like Hulk or Iron Man, like they're fine just because they're not mutants. Like, but beside the point, like I'm fine with it, not because of diversity, but it seems like a legitimate kind of new nuanced take, and also the way Hickman's wrote this is like every story of the X-Men theoretically has happened, you know, so this is like a new iteration or another timeline for them to try to figure out their war with humans.
Food for thought.
Yeah, I'm fine. A lot of people just hear Wolverine bisexual and read about it, and they don't think about the context they're reading.
So Vader, his nuts are burned off. His cock is burned off. Never again to be seen. Okay. They didn't even bother to reconstruct him out of sin flesh or give him some sort of phallic, like a robo cock. Right. But it seems like Vader lost interest in women after Padme. And do you remember, did you see that comic where there was some like crazy bitch who was in love with him?
He stabs her.
Yes, and he totally impales her, but she's like saving his like pieces of his cape and like, you know, like a toenail and like, you know, just weird shit. She has like this little box and she looks like Harley Quinn, but like with what's that meme? The crazy girlfriend eye.
Oh yeah,
You know that girl? Yeah.
Yeah.
So he didn't give a shit. She was like, "Oh, it's all about us," and he's just like cleaned the shit out of my quarters.
Yeah, I loved how the SJWs cried about that. Violence against women. It's like he's fucking space Hitler. Like he probably indirectly killed his wife. You know, I mean, I just think the presence of her would have got her killed, given Sidious's plan. You know, he needs to like tip him over. So Padme was always doomed.
Yeah.
Even if like the story was intended before the prequels to like, oh, she was just cast away or something, like, yeah, she was doomed.
Well, in the shit that I consider headcanon, I would like to believe that Anakin was a reaction of the Force towards the Sith's attempt to create life. So it's like, okay, you're trying to do this, well, I'm going to do that. And then once the Sith found out about Anakin, then of course, you know, but you get to this later point where Vader's just like burned and he's psychologically fucked and he has no love or aspiration outside of geez, like I don't even know if he considers Palpatine family, but he knows he doesn't have anything else. So why not? Why not just let go and be a beast?
Yeah, no, I think he's just kind of resigned to. He's kind of I'd say, a masochist in that way. From like the full storytelling, it seems he just kind of resigns himself to the abuse of Palpatine or the meddlings and the always trying to find someone better, but he cuts them down and kind of always keeps himself as kind of like Walter White in Breaking Bad, where Gale, I think is his name, could be his replacement, but it's like Walter's like, well, this will keep me alive if I kill that guy. There's no one to replace me. I think it was kind of a thread like that in his head. Because when you first meet him, he's just kind of like the bouncer for the Empire before you realize, oh, he's like number 2 in this, the main story is like this big fight of light and dark, and he's like number 2. But yeah, because when he learns about Luke, that seems to be his kind of turning point of direction of, like, especially, in the prequels with Padme and stuff. It's like, oh, wow, like my child I thought was dead with her. He's been alive this whole time. People hid him from me.
Well, and that's something else too. In the comic books, and this is canon in the comics if you accept Disney, Vader learned from Boba Fett that the pilot who blew up the Death Star was named Skywalker. And in that second, Vader intuited that that was his son. So in that self same moment, he must have realized that the Emperor was lying to him that whole time, and what the modus operandi of the Sith actually was. So it's almost like if he considered Palpatine his father emotionally, your dad lied to you your whole life, and it's crystallizing.
See, yeah, I think Palpatine's meant to be like this great meddler and deceitful guy, but I don't actually think Palpatine knew about Luke, because it seems like Padme dies and then they send the kids to Alderaan with Organa and then to Tatooine with Obi-Wan. So I don't think Palpatine actually knew about Luke.
So do you think that was the Force again reacting to the Sith and like, we're going to keep this hidden in the light side?
Yeah, maybe. And plus, like, at least with there's plausible deniability with like Organa having a kid because it's like a newborn. Like, oh, my wife had a baby finally. You aren't barren. You can just pass it off as his, like he did. And then Luke's hidden on a planet Vader theoretically would never go back to because of all the pain. It's a great way to hide in plain sight.
Well, I read this weird article, and I'm sorry, I can't remember the website or the fucking author. So again, if somebody knows, place it in the comment, and I'll tender a redaction. But there was a theory proposed by said Arthur and said article that Anakin actually came back during the you remember when Luke shows up and he was armed only with this, and they had that conversation, and Vader like took a step and had to breathe after Luke left. Like, this author supposed that that is when Anakin came back, and throughout their lightsaber battle, that was pretty much who was there. Do you think that's plausible or not?
That Anakin resurfaces
right after the I saw you constructed a new lightsaber. Indeed, your powers are
complete.
Yes.
No, I don't think his. It seems pretty clear he's trying to turn Luke into. I think he's kind of maybe hoping against the reality of the Sith that he's hoping that like they can make a club with Luke and be like the third wheel. Be like, hey, yeah, join Dad at work. It's not until to me, it's not until
Luke is
Luke's
being
getting
electrocuted. Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of the turn of like, wait a minute, you know. I wish the Family Guy version did something like that. Like, wait a minute, like that would have been good. But no, I think that's his turn because it seems he's still set on the dark side and trying to turn his son and maybe overthrow the Emperor because of the rule of two, or all be together. I don't know exactly what he's saying, but yeah, it seems very clear to me that he was, because he's like, oh, if I can't turn you, then there's another. It's like, sister, whether that was just him baiting him or if he actually maybe would kill Luke and go after Leia. Not very clear, but I think he was up until he's seen his son in agony. I don't think he really wants to turn to the light.
Well, it's a crazy thing as a parent imagining harm coming to your child. As a father, I'm filled with murderous rage should anybody ever look at my kid sideways. So to have somebody who is embroiled in the dark side for so long realize that this is how the Sith are. If you're not strong enough to kill this guy, then he's going to kill you, and I'm going to take him. And Anakin's been lied to his whole life. He's, but then, shit, like his son, like, is this a Grinch moment? Is his heart growing 3 sizes, and he's like charging to the rescue?
I guess you could kind of extrapolate that. Yeah. I mean, I think the context of the saga, people can crap on the prequels all they want, but I think it only adds to like that moment where it's like in 5 and 6 with like the son folly dynamic. I think the real. So if you just look at it by itself, the original trilogy, it's like this guy doesn't fucking know Vader, and Vader doesn't know his kid. There shouldn't be really any attachment aside from you think about, oh, this is what's left of Padme, to preserve, that's really the only attachment for Vader to have is an extension of Padme, something living from her, and to not make the same mistake twice. But otherwise, the storytelling is like so simplistic; it kind of undercuts itself, in my view. Like it ends just like perfectly. Where like, oh, it's like Hitler before the cyanide kicked in and killed him. He's like, "I'm sorry, God," and now he's forgiven. He's in heaven, and it's so simple. It's like it works for the audience. Everyone's like, "Oh, it's so great, Luke redeemed his father." It's like, yeah, he saved Hitler, and then Hitler thankfully dies, so there's no repercussion. But if like Vader lives, then now Luke's put in this hard spot of like, do I turn my dad over to be executed for war crimes by the Republic, or do I save him? Because like, what was the point of saving him if he's just going to have him be executed or whatever, punishment from the Republic? And so it's kind of convenient. There's some convenient storytelling in the original trilogy in that aspect of redemption, where it's like there's no actual like dealing with the ugly consequence of what Vader did.
Well, and so that's kind of funny to think about if we go off of your last thought. Luke lands on Endor. He has that Imperial shuttle, and he probably lands somewhere, and everyone's like, "Oh shit, Luke, we saw the Death Star explode, and we're so glad." Like Leia said you were okay, but we didn't know. What can we do? And Luke's like, "I just kind of need a few minutes." And they're like, "No, seriously, like let's help you. Like you're probably like scared and shocked." And Luke has like Vader's armor and probably the remains, and he wants to make a bonfire, but he has to be by himself. So he has to cleverly think of a way to tell these people to fuck off.
Yeah. Yeah, I just It's probably the one biggest thing I could like kind of like not shake my head at, because it's fine for the storytelling, but it's just like it puts a nice little bow on the story. But it's like, you know, if Lucas would have thought this out fully, like especially for a future trilogy, like that'd be something to like leave open. Is like Vader's alive, and maybe Luke put him in hiding or something, or he's like protecting his father, you know, against the Republic finding him or defending him even, and you know, kind of the constrained relations. And ultimately it's got to reflect on Leia, even though she doesn't know, or she just learned is that that's her dad. And it's like, wait, you're in this rebellion, but that's your dad. And like it could just look like it was all rigged, you know.
Well, and she only had like what, an hour to process that. Like it's dark. They're out in the fucking forests of Endor, and she's like, "What the fuck is up?" And he's like, "Look, I might not come back, but I need you to know this." And he says his fucking thing like he says it, and then she's like, "Holy fuck!" And then she has to deal with, she was tortured. Vader tortured Han Solo. Uh, Vader was complicit in the destruction of Alderaan, and that's her fucking dad.
Yeah, I know they wrote like some Leia in between her story about Kylo and stuff. I think it's Bloodlines or something, and like this is kind of why she does the Resistance as a tangent, because her relation to Vader or something. But I was actually thinking about this today. I've I wanted to make a video, I just didn't have time to before Rise of Skywalker came out and like knowing the end. But I kind of want to do it as like this is what I was hoping would happen, you know. There's that line in Force Awakens where he's like talking to Vader's helmet. He's like, "I'll finish what you started," and it's like, what did he start? Like, what does he think he started? Because like, it seems pretty clear in the storytelling that he has this mythos about Vader.
He has a
that
belief.
that doesn't include him turning to the light. And there's also this question of like, what Force Anakin couldn't have like visited him, and be like, "Hey, like I'm a good guy,"
Yeah.
you know? Or Luke Skywalker, his teacher, didn't like inform him. Like there's all these loose ends about
Or
the context.
if Luke could teach perception of Force ghosts, how come like Yoda and Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon Jinn and Mace Windu, everybody that fucking talked to Rey at the end of the movie, how come they couldn't be a part of like spectral Jedi school? Right. And that also, would you rather learn from Hayden Christensen or Sebastian Shaw?
Well, I'm a prequel guy, man. I want Anakin there. I want Hayden.
Okay.
You know, like when I see on Twitter, you know, it's like, oh man, you haven't seen like the original cut or something, so it's kind of sad. But you know, like it's kind of done its job with editing the original trilogy, where Hayden is at the end as the Jedi Force Ghost. Because most people my age or younger, they see Sebastian Shaw image at the end, they're like, who the fuck's that guy? You know, like they know Obi-Wan, they know Yoda, they don't know who the hell that third guy is. And
well, did you see the how it should have ended for Return of the Jedi?
oh, you mean Rise of Skywalker?
Oh no, well, and that's a good one too. But in Return of the Jedi, they did a parody where Sebastian Shaw shows up and he's like, "Hey everybody, I'm fucking good now." And then they're like, "Oh, it's a good thing you appeared like you now instead of like Hayden Christensen." And he goes, "Oh, like this," and he morphs into Hayden Christensen. And everybody laughs, and he's like, "Or how about this?" And then he morphs into like Annie, like baby Annie from Tatooine. He's like, "Oh, this is so wizard." You know?
I think the idea too was just to like that was his last good form, as opposed to the other guys died, you know, of old age, you know, or in an old form. So I think that's kind of the reasoning, along with just like kind of syncing up like the imagery for people of like, hey, Hayden is here because, you know, he's Anakin. I wouldn't have done that, you know, that edit, but I get it. And you know, I wish I could just get the context what JJ meant when he wrote that with Kazan about like finish what you started to Vader's helmet. because to me it's just so much potential. Like if he thinks because my whole idea, and it kind of turned this way, it again bought into the whole good guys win bullshit. But my idea, especially after Last Jedi, was, oh, he's on this path to actually like balance the Force with Rey, or himself, because he's like being pulled left and right with the light side and dark side. I thought maybe he would be the center character, and of course he just buys into the light side and dies.
We'll keep talking about that. I'll be back in about 2 minutes.
Yeah, just like I got this idea in this video of like what could have been, whether you like it or not, this could have been interesting to tell the story of like he thinks Vader undid the Empire or whatever, or maybe he thinks he just got marked on accident or something by Luke or whatever. It seems maybe they wrote it first as like he doesn't have the full pieces of the story. And so he has this warped idea of what Vader was setting out to do, and maybe going beyond the bifurcated view of the Force. And so maybe he's in with Snoke, but then he eventually kills him. He's trying to bring Rey in to like make this kind of Bendu, and it's kind of me tying it to Rebels as well, because you got that Bendu character that's like he doesn't view the dark side as bad or the light side as good. It's just elements of the full Force. It's kind of an incomplete thought, but that's where I was hoping the storytelling might go. Yeah, what's up, Tommy? I'm looking at the chat right now. I got Bear Nerd Fun in here as well. Thanks for sharing my link, Tommy. How many people do you mod for, Tommy?
Tommy is the fucking pimp daddy of all mods. We are grateful to have him. I first found Tommy when I was hanging out with Steven and all those guys in the fourth wave, which I think they're going on at this point too. But yeah. So let's see. He says, I like the comics version of Vader having it out with Boba Fett, although there's no way Fett would have stood a chance against him. Agreed. I actually go ahead, Angus.
Oh, I was just gonna counter with Jango and Obi-Wan. It seems whether Jango Fett was a Mandalorian or not, if he was just kind of wearing the armor and stuff, doing the bounty hunter job. I just use it as context. It's like, I don't know, man. It seems that there was a class of people that could take on Jedi, and that's kind of the bad thing with like Clone Wars and stuff. You got all these different opponents that can like take on Jedi for different means. Kind of devalues their elevated state in the universe of storytelling, but at the same time you have counters of like, well, this, Jedis aren't the end all be all, so it adds potential story conflict. So I'm at a tug of war about how I should feel. But no, I don't know about that comic Vader and both. It sounds really cool though. But again, Jango Fett, Obi-Wan, it's my counter.
Well, then let me ask you this: Darth Maul was subdued in the Clone Wars by the Mandalorians because he was put into some kind of Hannibal Lecter or walkie to the starship kind of shit. Do you think that's plausible, or do you think the Force needs you to move your hand or wiggle your arm or flex your sphincter, or do some sort of Kegel exercise to work? Or do you think like you can use your eyeballs or not even involve your organic body?
Well, doesn't Vader kill people without like moving an inch through?
Yeah, like in episode 5, he called fucking what's his name? Ozzel.
Admiral Kiet.
Yeah, through the view screen, he's like, I am tired of your failures.
He's like, you have failed me for the last time.
Yeah, dude. So
I love using that line when people say, oh, sorry, and I'll like joke with that line and they have no idea what I'm talking about. I'm just like, culture is fucked.
You have failed me for the last time, Admiral. So I guess we should talk a little bit about the last couple of episodes of Clone Wars. One thing that I thought was interesting was that they made a allusion to the Vader Rogue One hallway scene where they gave Darth Maul a hallway scene, and he seemed a little bit more bumbly than Vader, but you could draw the parallels there.
Yes, dude. I was so mad. Like when he's tearing up the hyperdrive in that
Yeah,
room. I was hoping, because you've never seen Maul use lightning, and it seems, at least it's argued, I think, that Vader doesn't use lightning because his mechanical body would short out by using
sure.
it. Um,
But
and
Maul was
I
put
haven't.
together with Night Sister alchemy. It's not
That's his
traditional
bottom.
cybernetics, right?
That's his bottom half.
Ah,
That's not his. That's not his
so
arms.
he
And
has
so,
organic upper body.
yeah. And so, I have a Clone Wars era, like the Gendy Tararovsky, how you say his name. I have that version of Darth Maul and the statue, and he's like force lightning, and he's kind of looking at his hand and like looking at the power he has, and it's like, oh, he never got that yet, Lightning Maul, come on, you know. I don't know if he was just like more of an assassin type Sith than like full bore train him up in like the full power of the Sith. I don't know. I'm assuming wielders of the Force, and Vader's kind of hampered by his body, and that's why you never saw it from him. But um, there's also like the escalation of storytelling where it's like, oh, this is what you know so far, and then it's like, oh fuck, there's lightning from the guy, you know. But yeah, I was hoping, especially in that moment when it's like all shredding apart and stuff, the engine, I was hoping you would have saw Maul just lightning the shit, and you're like, yes, unlimited power. But it was really cool, just like the last 4 episodes of Clone Wars. There's so much, just like, it was simple. It wasn't a lot to take away from the plot necessarily. It was just kind of awe-inspiring because it's reflecting as a tangent to the saga, to episode 3. And there's just so
Yeah.
much good visual storytelling. It's very quiet. It reminded me of rewatch. Like, I'm starting to rewatch in its entirety the Samurai Jack series, and it's such a cool. Like, it's weird because I'm 28 now, and I really appreciate like the Revenant. Very quiet storytelling where it's like a lot of just using the visuals to tell a story, not dialogue heavy. I love that because a lot of people are afraid to do that. You don't see it often, or if you do, it's not well done. And the Clone Wars, these last episodes have really done that. They've used just a lot of good visual storytelling. And there's a lot of things like I talked about in my review, like you heard. It's like, man, if we could have saw like a foreshadowing or a flashback of like the last battle of the Empire over Jakku to get to that scene of the downed Star Destroyer. You know, it looks epic on its
Yeah.
own, but if you could have saw that fall of the Empire happening, and it would look something like the Clone Wars episode. Like, I feel the Clone Wars, these last episodes, have visually gone ways that Star Wars hasn't even touched yet.
Well, and I want to, and Tommy, if you're still there, throw his review of the final episode of Clone Wars into the chat. I have my own thing coming out probably today or tomorrow, but I want to ask something that has not been addressed in either circumstance. Ahsoka Tano, she's standing on the bridge of that Republic starship, the predecessor to Star Destroyer class, and she senses the shift in the Force, and it sounds like she hears, "What have I done?" and unlimited power and all that kind of shit. But in Rebels, she acts like she didn't know that it was Anakin. So, do you think there was something fishy going on, like? Or what's your hypothesis on that, sir?
I think she like given the full storytelling and just giving Disney the benefit of the doubt that this wasn't a misstep in full spectrum storytelling of a saga. I want to say that she probably knew the truth the whole time, but buried it or lied to herself until she was actually faced with like, no, this is Anakin.
until it
He really did.
finally like she lost consciousness from what I remember in Rebels.
Yeah, I want to say this is how do I put it? Like, perhaps maybe she lied to herself, and maybe she thought Anakin died as well.
Hmm.
And so then, the full context, you go back to Rebels, and it's like she faces them. It's like, oh no, it really, like, you really did. And you've been a part of this whole thing. You've killed your brethren. You've stabbed everyone in the back and are alive, and I don't even recognize you. Because maybe like, like the Sith cloak themselves from detection.
Yes.
And you got Luke Skywalker who just like tapped out of the Force. And then I don't know if it's EU or if no, I want to say it's in Revan. This one character saves people, but she like severed her connection to the Force. So they've done this in Disney and before, with characters removing themselves by accident or what have you, by choice, from the Force. So maybe there's something like that as well, where she couldn't recognize his signature. She just felt like maybe darkness take over the
Like it was
guy.
so irredeemably dark, like she assumed he died.
Yeah, I think at least that's us filling in blanks. It's kind of like when you talk about like, wait, why is the Empire like, even though they're supposed to be better and newer, their stuff's crappier than like the Republic, and you can like fill in the blanks. You're like, well, they based the TIE fighter off the Jedi Starfighter and didn't take into account the pilots. Where it's like you fill in the blanks that weren't expressed and could be plot holes, but you can like fish around it.
Yeah.
So
Well, and
at worst they got an easy way to explain it.
well, and maybe she was going through the 5 stages, where it's denial and then anger and then
And
bargaining
on top of it, she's surviving and building a rebellion. So
with the guilt. Yeah. So, okay, Vader. We saw Vader in the Clone Wars, the very last scene where and I'm sorry if nobody has seen this, go and fucking watch it. We've seen it. We get some like Empire era technology and stormtroopers, but Vader comes upon the wrecked ship and the helmets on pikes, and eventually Ahsoka's weapon. Go.
oh, I you left it open like you had more to say. Maybe it's just we're rusty between each other, lack of streaming.
It's all good. It's all good.
Yeah, man, that was like that's what I'm talking about. That whole sequence, like, I don't know if even the stormtroopers say anything to him. He just like walks over there and then he finds it and he ignites it, and that was really cool. The only time I seen Vader with the blue lightsaber was when you play Vader versus Vader in Episode 3 game. And just for contrast, they have one like standard red and the other one's blue. That was just really cool imagery, seeing Vader with a blue lightsaber. But it said so much about like he probably knows she's alive then if that's there, and that like the burial is there. It was that was a gesture that a clone of themselves wouldn't do, perhaps. And finding that like probably mixed emotions, because you're assuming that's right after Episode 3 at some point, maybe a month or so after.
Well, that was my question, Angus. Like, were you able to pin down a timetable on that, or what was your logic for when that occurred?
I'm assuming after like the final scene in Episode 3 when Vader and Sidious are looking at the frame of the Death Star being built.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe after that, at some point, he's checking on this recent event. But It's hard exactly to pinpoint. Maybe he could have done this before he did that scene, but it's all like in the same little span, So I would say within a year or less, because you got to think too. Why would he go to the site of a former Jedi who's gone missing now? Why would he take this sweet time to go there? So this could have been pretty recent after his defeat and the crash. Like, they could have kind of coincided, perhaps.
Well, and there was a couple of other cues, and I'll give a little bit of a spoiler into my video, that convinced me that this was a new in the suit Vader versus something like Rogue One or Empire, something along those lines. The fact that he bent down and picked it up versus treating it like a thing and like whipping it into his hand. And he used his hand to wipe off the snow or whatever the fuck that was. Told you that there was some emotion behind it, which I think Vader might have possessed those in his early suit days because it hadn't been purged from him. Whereas later on, he was black. What do you think, man?
I don't know. Like, Rogue One, that sequence happens, you would think maybe a day before A New Hope happens, but there's a clearly different body and way of using Vader in the original trilogy. They're very limited by his suit compared to, especially with a cartoon version of himself or a video game, what you can do with that character. So I think picking up on like him bending down or something, like, he's very limited in his range of motion in the suit in the original trilogy, just because it's difficult to move, just like the Batman 89 suit's hard to move in, so I think when you're arguing like actual filming in that suit versus an animated show, like, they're doing more, because you're supposed to, like, he's a Dark Lord of the Sith. You think the full context of the story, he should be somewhat mobile, but storytelling and limitations of actual props, I think, kind of makes you think a different way of like age or something, when it's like, this is Star Wars and he's got a robot body, so he should be pretty limber actually. But he's just like so strong. He's very deliberate with his motions.
Interesting stuff. Well, thanks for joining me, Black Angus. I want to thank everybody for listening tonight. Want to thank Tommy and Bear for their patronage during our stream. Again, I'm fairly new to streaming, so I'm sure that this will pick up traction further on down the line. And then one day we'll all be laughing about when I had 2 viewers watching a channel like this. And beyond that, Angus, I want to thank you for finding me in this wild world of the Phantom Menace. You have actually been very much a gatherer of people, and some people who have gone on to surmount the whatever the fuck you want to call that. They've climbed to the upper echelons of the beginning 3 that we've seen. What are your plans for your channel in the future, man?
I don't really have plans. I'm like the Joker. I just do things. Yeah, it's really it. I don't have any stated mission statement necessarily. I'm just covering what I do and trying to be a steward of what I think the Menace should be, and so that's why we get content like my recent Menace video. So I think we've kind of gone astray from wanting to make Star Wars better to now just capitalizing in large on what we see as errors, and I think that's a misstep. And also, regardless of there's I talk about Wisecrack a lot. I love that channel. I wish I had the knowledge base to make videos like them with their philosophy extrapolations onto pop culture. But the way we present stuff, there's a reason why the top channels are kind of have hit a wall. Maybe the Naughty Dog stuff has helped boost them a little bit recently, but overall, with most of the content we like to cover, Star Wars mainly, or Marvel, I'd say we've all kind of hit a wall, and we're trying to figure a way to break past it. And I think it's not so much what we say, it's how we say it. So I challenge everyone that will watch this or is to watch the Wisecrack video about Rise of Skywalker, what went wrong. And they say pretty much everything wrong with it, like the Phantom Menace does. But there's not like this kind of vitriol or like, hee, y'all suck. And they even go beyond and talk about philosophy of like Karl Marx and Hegel, and really give you extra stuff to kind of think on or invest in later to make future arguments about film or pop culture. I think we should try to learn from that. They're present, like a few presented top tier Menace channel content about Rise of Skywalker to a Star Wars fan versus that video of, and that fan you're presenting as a sequel fan, the way they're going to react to how most of us talk about the sequel trilogy versus that video that says the same stuff without this kind of talking down to is like, you're not a real fan because you're a Disney fan, or that's a problem. And just kind of this talk about like, oh, you got the EU, and then, well, they kind of pulled from Dark Empire to make the Palpatine story, but then we bitch about that. Now there's reason to bitch about like the delivery, the inconsistency or what have you, but they kind of pulled from the EU to make that story, and we discredited that. And it's like, they're not going to listen to us when we yell about one thing and then they do something, or to some degree what we want, and then bitch about that. The whole movie was trying to distance itself from Last Jedi, and no one really seems to give it credit for that. And I think that's a problem for growth of like, we need to grow not just number wise for all our channels, but we need to grow to actually have an influence. If you think about any of the top channels, or if you combine them thinking that each channel has completely unique viewership, you're only going to get maybe 20-30 million bucks from a box office if every subscriber paid a ticket potentially for a movie. We don't have that big of a pull necessarily on the media, and I think the way we present can get a lot of attention from the negativity about something, but we need to like rationalize and pick our battles and pick about how we go about them. Grace Randolph has said a lot of stuff that we say about Star Wars and Game of Thrones, but she keeps growing slowly and steadily and has a bigger platform to talk and persuade people than we do. I think it's for a reason. It's all about presentation, not rhetoric, but presentation. So
very well said, sir.
I try to bring that kind of reasonability to these discussions. Not just to like kind of have our side of the as I see it.
Well, that's an interesting way to put it. And similarly, I wish that Fandom Menace channels would focus more on a critique of entertainment, whatever their fucking vision is, versus he said this and she said that and they said the other thing. All that shit should be handled in DMs or behind the scenes. Star Wars or fucking Ghostbusters or X-Men, that should be what we talk about. It shouldn't be cults of personality versus cults of personality. Just what I think. Yeah. Well, anyway, we want to thank you for joining us. We want you to have a wonderful Mexican beer day and a savage revenge of the 5th.